In Delta State, Nigeria, nestled between vast green forests, lived a young girl named Ifeoma. She was known throughout the village for her kind heart and willingness to help anyone in need. Whether it was fetching water for an elderly neighbor, gathering herbs for the village healer, or simply listening to the stories of the elders, Ifeoma was always there to lend a hand. Her gentle spirit and trust in others made her beloved by everyone. But her mother, a wise woman who had seen the dangers of the world, often warned her, "The world is not kind to girls who trust too easily. My child, there are dangers beyond our village, things you cannot see, and people you cannot trust." Ifeoma, however, was too innocent to fully understand her mother's words. She believed in the goodness of people and the peacefulness of the world. She knew the village was small, with only a handful of homes, and the people were tight-knit, bound together by generations of shared history and mutual care. The forest that surrounded the village seemed like a place of magic and wonder to her. Stories of spirits, ancient trees, and hidden paths filled her imagination. Yet beneath these stories, her mother often spoke in hushed tones of dangerous men who roamed the forests, waiting for an opportunity to prey on the unsuspecting. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Ifeoma's mother called her into the hut. "Ifeoma, I need you to deliver this package to your grandmother. She's run out of supplies, and I promised her I would send these to her. It is getting late, so be quick, but be careful on the way." Ifeoma eagerly took the small bundle wrapped in cloth. It wasn't a long journey to her grandmother's village, just a short trek through the forest and across a small stream. But her mother's warning echoed in her mind. "Don't stray from the path, my child, and don't trust anyone along the way." "Of course, mother. I'll be careful," Ifeoma replied, though she felt a flutter of excitement. She loved visiting her grandmother. The old woman always had fascinating tales of the world beyond the village, and taught her secrets of the land that no one else knew. As she walked toward the edge of the village, she noticed how the shadows stretched longer as the sun set lower. The air was thick with the earthy smell of the forest, and the rustling of leaves echoed in her ears. She was aware of the dangerous unknown that lurked in the woods, but Ifeoma, young and trusting, felt a sense of comfort in the familiar path. She followed the trail she had walked 1,000 times before. But as she ventured deeper into the trees, the familiar landmarks seemed to fade. The wind stirred the leaves, and Ifeoma's feet seemed to guide her in a direction she hadn't expected. As the darkness thickened, she noticed a narrow, unfamiliar path veering off the main trail. The air seemed to beckon her, whispering her name. For a moment she hesitated, but the thought of reaching her grandmother's house before it grew too dark pushed her forward. She told herself it would be quicker this way, just a short detour, a shortcut that would save time. The moment she stepped onto the unfamiliar trail, something shifted in the atmosphere. The trees seemed to close in, their gnarled branches twisting like ancient fingers, reaching down to touch her. The deeper she went, the more she felt as though she was being watched. The wind carried faint sounds, voices perhaps, or just the rustle of leaves, but Ifeoma was too focused on reaching her grandmother to pay them any mind. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, and with each step, the forest grew darker, more oppressive. Ifeoma could no longer see the path clearly, and her heart began to race as she realized she had strayed too far. The familiar sounds of the village children laughing and the crackling of fires were replaced by eerie silence. She looked around, trying to spot any signs of where she had gone wrong, but the trees seemed to obscure everything. Ifeoma's breath quickened as she felt a deep unease settle in her chest. The fear of being lost took hold of her. She turned back only to see that the path she had taken was now shrouded in thick fog, as if the forest had swallowed it whole. She was alone. The forest, which had once seemed magical and comforting, now felt like an endless maze, and Ifeoma was no longer sure which way to go. The shadows between the trees seemed to lengthen, and every rustle of leaves made her jump. The world felt alien to her now, unfamiliar and full of unseen dangers. Her mother's warning echoed again in her mind, but it was too late. She had ventured into a place where no kindness could be trusted. The forest, with its spirits and dangerous men, was no longer a place of wonder, but of lurking, unseen threats. As Ifeoma stood in the heart of the dense forest, the reality of her situation began to settle in. The trees, tall and twisted, seemed to press in from all sides, their branches like claws in the dimming light. The darkness was growing thicker, and with it, a deep, unsettling silence. Her breath quickened, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up as she scanned the forest around her. Ifeoma had never been this far from the village, and the path that had once seemed like a shortcut now felt like an unforgiving trap. Her legs were sore from walking in circles, and her mind raced with worry. She was lost. She couldn't remember which direction she had come from or which way to go. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows darkening with each passing minute. She felt a wave of panic rise within her, a fear she had never known before. And then, just as she was beginning to lose hope, she saw it. A flicker of light in the distance. It was soft at first, barely visible through the trees, but as she approached it, it grew brighter, the warm glow of a campfire. Ifeoma's heart skipped a beat as she moved toward it, hoping for a sign of safety. Her eyes strained through the darkness, and soon she could make out the shapes of 3 figures sitting around the fire. They were men, dressed in worn clothing with faces half obscured by the flickering shadows. At first, they didn't notice her. She stood there for a moment, unsure whether to approach or not. But then one of the men looked up, his eyes catching hers in the firelight. A smile spread across his face, and he stood up slowly. "Are you lost, my child?" His voice was smooth, kind, and soft like honey, but there was something in the way he spoke that sent a shiver down her spine. Ifeoma hesitated, feeling a knot tighten in her stomach. "I've lost my way," she stammered. "I was on my way to my grandmother's village, but I don't know where I am." The man nodded, his smile never fading. "You're safe here. We've traveled these woods many times. We can help you find your way. Come sit by the fire and rest. The night is cold and you've traveled far." His offer was comforting, and the warmth of the fire seemed to beckon her. She was exhausted, both physically and mentally, and the idea of sitting by the fire, even for just a moment, felt like a relief. Her mind told her to be cautious, but the exhaustion in her body was louder than the warning in her head. Slowly, she moved toward the fire and sat on a nearby log, grateful for the warmth. The 3 men seemed harmless enough in the firelight. They looked like travelers, tired, worn, but not unfriendly. "You've had quite the journey, young one," the second man said, his voice gravelly but kind. He was taller, his face weathered from years of travel, with a deep scar running down one side of his cheek, a reminder of past struggles. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ifeoma," she replied softly, glancing at him as she tried to get comfortable. "A beautiful name for a beautiful girl," the third man added. His smile was almost too wide. He was younger than the others, but his eyes held a strange glint, something that made Ifeoma's pulse quicken slightly. "You are far from home," he said with an unsettling grin. "I'm just trying to get to my grandmother's village," Ifeoma said, trying to ignore the unease that was starting to grow in her chest. "I got lost." The first man, who had spoken to her first, sat back down on a nearby stone. His eyes fixed on her with a strange intensity. "We understand," he said in a soothing voice. "The forest can be disorienting. We've all lost our way at some point. But don't worry, Ifeoma. We will help you get home at sunrise. We'll take you back to your village. You'll be safe with us." Ifeoma felt a flicker of relief at the promise of safety. The warmth of the fire, the comforting tone of their voices, and their reassuring words all felt so genuine. They seemed like men who knew the dangers of the forest, men who understood the treacherous paths. She could trust them, couldn't she? They were offering her help after all. But as she sat there, staring into the flames, something about the way they looked at her made her stomach churn. Their eyes, though kind, held something she couldn't quite place, an unreadable gleam that made her feel small, as though she were something to be examined, something to be owned. I don't mean to trouble you, Iphioma said, shifting uncomfortably on the log. But how do I know you can be trusted? My mother always warned me about strangers. The men laughed, but it wasn't an easy laugh. It was low, almost mocking. The second man leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the firelight. Your mother is wise, little one, he said. But sometimes trust is the only thing we have in this world. We can't survive without it. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Iphioma swallowed, feeling a knot tighten in her throat. The fire crackled, its warmth almost suffocating now. The shadows of the men seemed to stretch longer, more sinister. We will take you home at sunrise, the third man repeated, his voice soft but insistent. You'll be safe with us. Something in his tone sent a chill through Iphioma's body. She looked into their eyes again, seeing the glint of something that wasn't quite right. It wasn't just kindness she saw. There was something darker, something hungry lurking beneath the surface. But she was so tired, so scared, and the fire was warm. Reluctantly, she nodded. Thank you, she whispered, trying to ignore the feeling that something terrible was about to unfold. As the men moved closer to her, their smiles widening, Iphioma felt an icy sense of foreboding coil deep inside her. Something wasn't right, but she was too weary to run. She had nowhere else to go. The fire crackled again, and the men's eyes never left her. The warmth of the fire wrapped around Iphioma, her legs aching from the long walk, her mind muddled with exhaustion. The men's voices soothed her, the steady hum of the night seeming to lull her into a trance-like stupor. She hadn't realized how hungry and tired she was until they placed a bowl of food in front of her. The dish was simple, a stew of grains, vegetables, and something she couldn't quite identify, but the scent of it was intoxicating, and the men urged her to eat. You must be starving, little one, the second man said, his voice low and gentle. Eat. It will help you regain your strength for the journey ahead. She nodded faintly, too tired to argue. The warmth of the food spread through her, settling in her stomach and filling her with a false sense of comfort. She ate quickly, not even noticing that the flavor seemed strangely overpowering, rich and heavy. At first, the food tasted fine, but as she continued eating, a drowsy fog began to settle over her mind. Her eyelids grew heavy, and her body began to feel limp, as though the earth beneath her were pulling her down into a deep sleep. One of the men, the first one who had spoken to her, watched her closely, his eyes never leaving her face as she took bite after bite, each one seemingly draining more of her energy. Iphioma fought the drowsiness, but it was no use. Her limbs felt like lead, her thoughts slowed, and the firelight began to blur in her vision. The men's voices grew distant, their words no longer as clear as they had been before. You're safe now, Iphioma, the third man whispered. His voice sounded soothing, almost loving, but it carried an edge of something darker beneath it. Rest now, little one. Everything will be all right. But Iphioma couldn't rest. The warning bells in her head were too loud, too persistent. Something wasn't right. She wanted to speak, to ask them what they had done to her, but the words wouldn't come. Her body felt heavy, her arms unable to move, and her head was spinning with confusion. The fire's glow became too bright, too hot, and she turned her head away, struggling to keep her eyes open as her strength drained away. Her thoughts became fragmented, flashes of memories and fears swirling together. She tried to focus on her grandmother's village, on the home she longed to return to, but the thoughts slipped away like sand through her fingers. Instead, there was only the oppressive feeling of the forest closing in around her and the men's eyes, those dark, predatory eyes staring at her with growing hunger. Don't fight it, little one, the first man said, his voice more urgent now. You'll only make it harder for yourself. The world around her seemed to dissolve as she slipped deeper into the haze. Then, before she could fully grasp what was happening, the man reached out and grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. The touch sent a jolt of terror through her, and she tried to pull away, but her body wouldn't respond. Her heart raced as she struggled, her body feeling like it was moving through thick mud. She looked into his eyes, the once kind smile now gone, replaced by something far darker. "Nothing is free, little one," he whispered into her ear, his breath hot and foul. "You thought we were helping you, didn't you?" Ifeoma's throat tightened in fear as she tried to speak, but no sound escaped. She struggled harder, her fingers clawing at the dirt, but it was no use. The men had her trapped. The second man stood, moving toward her with slow, deliberate pace. "You should have known better than to trust strangers in the forest," he said, his voice cold and distant. "But now you belong to us." Ifeoma's pulse quickened, a surge of panic shooting through her chest. She screamed, her voice ragged and weak, but the sound was swallowed by the vastness of the forest. The men didn't stop. Instead, their hands were on her, pulling her toward them, forcing her down onto the ground. She tried to fight, to push them away, but the drowsiness clouding her mind made every movement sluggish, every scream weaker than the last. They were too strong. Too many. The first man pressed his knee into her chest, pinning her down. His smile twisted into something cruel. "Don't worry, little one. You'll learn what it means to be ours," he said, his fingers tightening around her wrist, his grip unyielding. Ifeoma's eyes blurred with tears, her heart hammering in her chest as the horror of the situation fully settled in. This wasn't kindness. This wasn't help. It was a trap, a cruel, twisted game they had lured her into. She had been nothing more than prey to them, a vulnerable, trusting girl lost in the woods. The second man moved closer, his hands rough as they began to tear her clothes. Ifeoma's screams became frantic, her body writhing beneath them, but the men were relentless. She felt a deep, sickening despair take over as she realized no one was coming to help her. The forest, so full of life just hours before, had turned into a silent, empty place, a place where no one would hear her cries. The darkness around her seemed to swallow everything. Her hope, her strength, her voice. One by one, the men took turns, their laughter low and cruel as they violated her, their faces cold and indifferent to her pain. She fought with everything she had left, but the haze in her mind dulled her strength, and she was nothing but a helpless, broken shell. The fire flickered, casting strange, elongated shadows across the ground, but there was no light to save her. The forest remained silent, the only sound the men's mocking laughter and her own helpless sobs. It was as though the world had turned its back on her, as though she were invisible, a forgotten soul in the dark, twisted corners of the forest. Her screams faded into the night, unheard, unanswered. The men's cruel game continued, and Ifeoma was left to wonder, in her final moments of consciousness, if anyone would ever remember her name. As the night stretched on, Ifeoma's consciousness began to slip away, her body sinking into the darkness as though the earth itself was claiming her. The fire's light flickered out, leaving only the cold embrace of the forest around her. The men, their cruel laughter fading into the distance, continued with their twisted game, and Ifeoma's sense of time became distorted. Each breath felt like an eternity, her chest rising and falling as though in a fog. She could no longer tell if she was awake or dreaming. The night seemed endless, full of suffocating silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the forest. Ifeoma lay there, broken and battered, her mind replaying the events of the evening in fragments, pieces that made no sense but came together in a dreadful harmony, deeper than any pain she had ever known. But amidst her pain there was a flicker, a spark of something. Something primal that surged within her. It was a quiet voice, a whisper that told her she was not alone. It was as if the earth had heard her cry, as if the spirits of the land were watching, waiting. They would not let this be her end. Ifeoma's breath grew shallow as she lay still in the darkness. Her thoughts swirled, fragments of memories and emotions mixed with her fading strength. The faint, distant echo of her mother's voice pierced through the fog of her mind. The world is not kind to girls who trust too easily. The warning rang in her ears, but now the warning seemed too late to heed. Suddenly, her eyes fluttered open, and she found herself staring at the ceiling of the forest above. A figure stood before her, an old woman, her skin dark and weathered by time, yet her eyes glowed with an otherworldly radiance. Ifeoma blinked, unsure if this was a dream or reality, but there was something about the woman that felt real, as though she had stepped out of a forgotten realm. The woman's hair was long, tangled with vines and beads, and she wore a garment woven from the fibers of the forest. Her presence felt like the earth itself had manifested in human form. Ifeoma's eyes widened as the woman stepped forward, her movements graceful, and she knelt beside Ifeoma, her hand warm on Ifeoma's shoulder. "You called upon the spirits, child," the woman said, her voice soft yet commanding like the wind through the trees. "The earth remembers your pain. The sky watches over you." Ifeoma's heart began to race, her body trembling under the weight of this strange encounter. The exhaustion and pain of the night seemed to lift, as though the woman's touch brought a comfort Ifeoma had never known. It wasn't the comfort of a physical touch, but something deeper, something ancient, resonating within her. I didn't mean to," Ifeoma whispered, her voice cracking as the memories of the night replayed in her mind. "I just wanted to find my way. I was lost." The woman's eyes softened, a glint of something almost maternal in them. She placed a hand on Ifeoma's chest, her fingers resting just above her heart. "The spirits have heard your cry, child. You are not alone. The earth, the river, the trees, they are with you now. The wrongs done to you will not go unanswered." Ifeoma's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled to sit up, her body still heavy and weak. The woman held her steady, her grip strong and grounding. Who are you?" Ifeoma managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled, her eyes reflecting the light of the moon that now shone down through the trees. "I am of the land, child. Protector. One who listens when the earth calls for justice. You have felt the wrongs of this world, but you are not alone in your suffering." Ifeoma, still trembling, looked down at her hands, covered in dirt and blood. "I don't know if I can survive this," she whispered, the weight of her trauma bearing down on her. I feel broken." "You are not broken," the woman replied, her voice firm yet tender. "You are a daughter of the earth. And the earth does not break, it heals. You will find strength again, in ways you cannot yet see." A sense of peace began to settle in Ifeoma's chest, though her mind remained clouded by the pain of what had happened. She looked up at the woman, searching her face for any sign of comfort, but found only a strength that seemed to emanate from within her, as if the woman herself was a part of the forest. "Come with me," the woman said, offering her hand to Ifeoma. "The spirits are gathering, and they will take what is owed. Justice is coming." Ifeoma hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously toward the spot where the men had once stood. The fire was gone now, reduced to embers, and the forest seemed to grow even darker with each passing moment. But the woman's presence was undeniable. She could feel the pull of the woman's power, the force of the land itself, urging her to follow. I don't know what to do," Ifeoma whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I'm scared. I don't want to go back to the village like this. What if I'm never the same again?" The woman's eyes softened, her hand resting gently on Ifeoma's. "You will be the same. You will be even stronger. The spirits will guide you. The forest will remember what has been done to you." The forest was alive. Ifeoma felt it now more than ever. The pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the rustle of the leaves above, the hum of ancient forces moving in the shadows. The men who had wronged her would pay for their cruelty. The land would not forget. As Ifeoma rose to her feet, supported by the woman's steady hand, the trees around them seemed to whisper. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of fresh rain and earth, a promise of something new, something powerful. "Justice is coming," the woman repeated, her voice carrying the weight of the ages. "But you, Ifeoma, you must be ready. The spirits are not easily appeased. They require more than just words. They require action." Ifeoma nodded, her heart heavy but resolute. She had seen the men's cruelty. She had felt their power. But now, she knew there was a power greater than theirs, a power that would not allow them to escape their actions. As the woman led her through the forest, Iphioma could feel the weight of the spirits around her, the ancient forces that guided her steps. The path was no longer unclear, no longer twisted and uncertain. The forest had opened up to her, showing her the way. They reached a clearing, where the moonlight bathed the earth in silver light. In the center of the clearing stood a large stone, ancient and weathered, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to pulse with life. The air was thick with energy, as if the very earth was holding its breath. Iphioma stood before the stone, her heart racing. The woman stepped forward, her hands raised to the sky. She began to chant in a language that Iphioma did not understand, but the words felt familiar, as though they had always been a part of her. The wind stirred around them, carrying the chant through the trees, until it seemed to echo across the entire forest. The ground beneath Iphioma's feet began to vibrate. She could feel the power building surging through her, and for the first time she felt it. Her connection to the land, to the spirits, to the forces that govern the earth. "Now, child," the woman said, her voice commanding yet filled with a strange gentleness. "Let the earth claim its due." In that moment Iphioma understood. She understood the power that had been awakened within her, the power that would bring justice to the men who had hurt her. The land, the spirits, the forces of the earth, they would not forget. They had listened to her pain, and now they would exact their revenge. Iphioma raised her hands to the sky, feeling the pulse of the earth in her veins. The forest seemed to bend and shift around her, the trees groaning with ancient power. The spirits were moving, taking action, and Iphioma was the vessel through which they would bring justice. "Let them know what it means to wrong the land," the woman whispered, her voice merging with the winds. Iphioma closed her eyes and let herself be swept away by the power of the spirits, the earth, the river, the trees. She was no longer just a girl. She was something more, something bound to the land, a living force of nature that would never be forgotten. And the men who had wronged her, who had discarded her, would learn what it meant to face the wrath of the earth. As Iphioma closed her eyes, a wave of power washed over her, strong and undeniable. It felt as though the entire forest was alive, its pulse quickening, its heartbeat aligning with her own. The wind began to howl through the trees, whispering ancient secrets, carrying with it the weight of time itself. She felt her spirit rising, not just as a girl, but as an embodiment of the forest's deep, enduring will. The land had felt her pain, and now it would respond. The woman, whose presence had seemed ethereal and omnipotent, moved back, allowing Iphioma to stand alone in the center of the clearing. The chants of the spirits were growing louder now, reverberating through the leaves, the earth, the very sky above them. Iphioma felt an undeniable connection to every part of the forest. The tree trunks seemed to stretch upward, as though reaching toward the heavens, while the roots beneath her feet intertwined with her own soul. She was no longer an outsider in this place. She was one with it. The stone in the center of the clearing, old and etched with symbols, began to glow softly. It wasn't the warm, gentle glow of firelight, but rather a cool, ancient light, blue and green, like the glow of bioluminescent moss deep in forgotten caves. The symbols on the stone pulsed, as if they were alive, as if they were remembering something long buried. A deep voice, ancient and yet clear as though it were her own thoughts, echoed through the forest. "You have called upon us, child of the land. You have awakened the spirits, and we hear you. The wrongs done to you will not be forgotten. You are the voice of the forest now. We will answer." Iphoma's heart raced. She had never felt such a powerful connection to the earth, and yet, at the same time, she felt a surge of responsibility. The spirits were listening. The forest was listening. And they were going to make sure justice was served. "Take this strength," the woman's voice said, her words gentle but firm. "It is the strength of the forest, the strength of the river, the strength of the wind. Let it flow through you, child, for you are no longer a victim. You are a force." The ground beneath Iphioma trembled as the spirits spoke, and in that moment, she felt the truth of those words. She had been a victim once, but now she was no longer powerless. Her strength was rooted deep within the earth itself. She was the embodiment of its power, its justice, its vengeance. And she would carry out that vengeance, not out of hate, but out of necessity, to restore balance. The wind picked up again, swirling around Iphioma, lifting her hair and carrying the scent of the earth and the river. The night felt charged with energy, and the atmosphere thickened with an almost palpable weight. Iphioma felt the energy surging inside her, rising like a tide. It was her moment, her time to act. She raised her hands toward the heavens, calling upon the power of the earth, the forest, and the spirits. "Let justice be done," she cried out, her voice ringing through the night. "Let those who have wronged me pay for their deeds. Let the land remember what they have done." As her words rang out, the ground beneath her feet seemed to shake. The trees creaked and groaned, their roots stirring as though waking from a deep slumber. The air around Iphioma grew dense, and for a moment, she thought she could hear voices whispering through the wind. They weren't the voices of the men who had wronged her. They weren't the voices of anyone she knew. These were the voices of the forest itself, ancient and wise. "Justice will be served," the voices echoed in unison, a chorus of power. "The spirits have heard. The earth will remember. And those who trespass upon the land will face the consequences of their actions." Iphioma's chest rose and fell as her heart pounded with anticipation. She could feel the energy swelling inside her, stronger, more intense than ever before. The forest had chosen her, and she was ready to fulfill her purpose. The woman, who had watched silently as Iphioma called upon the spirits, stepped forward once more. Her voice was filled with pride. "You are the chosen one, Iphioma. The forest has spoken. Now you must bring the men who have wronged you to justice. They will not escape the land's wrath." Iphioma nodded, her face set with determination. She knew what she had to do. The men who had tortured her, who had stolen her innocence and used her as prey, they would pay. But it would not be through violence, it would not be through anger. It would be through the forces of nature, the ancient powers that govern the land. They would learn what it meant to desecrate the earth. The woman reached out and touched Iphioma's forehead, and in that moment, Iphioma's senses seemed to expand. She could feel everything, every movement of the leaves, every gust of wind, every ripple in the nearby river. She could feel the men, far away now, still wandering the forest, unaware that their fate had already been sealed. The woman's words were soft but laced with power. "The spirits will guide you. The forest will help you find them. Go, and let justice unfold." Iphioma turned and began walking through the forest, her steps sure and steady. The wind seemed to guide her, bending around her like an invisible hand. Her heart was calm, her mind focused. She could sense the men ahead of her, their movements sluggish, their hearts growing more and more frantic. They could feel it too. The forest was alive, and it was coming for them. As she walked deeper into the woods, Iphioma began to hear the distant sounds of their voices, low, nervous, tinged with fear. They knew something was wrong. They felt the land shifting around them. The spirits were gathering. The air grew thick and heavy as Iphioma approached them, the forest closing in around them as though it had a life of its own. The men were no longer laughing, no longer acting with the same arrogance they had when they had first crossed her path. They were afraid. They had done something they couldn't undo, and they knew it. Suddenly, the trees in front of Iphioma began to stir. The branches swayed and creaked, and the ground beneath her feet rumbled. She could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her, the rhythm of nature itself, and she could sense that the spirits were near. The men were trapped. Iphioma stepped forward, her presence like the calm before a storm. The men froze as they turned to face her, their faces pale with fear. They had never expected her to come for them like this, never imagined that the forest itself would rise against them. "You thought you could use me," Iphioma said, her voice steady and strong, "but the land does not forget. The spirits do not forgive." The men looked around frantically, but they couldn't see it. They couldn't see the power that was gathering around them, the weight of the spirits watching them from every corner of the forest. Their hearts beat faster, their hands trembling as they reached for weapons that no longer mattered. One of them, the first man who had spoken to Ifeoma, took a step forward. His voice was shaky, but he tried to sound confident. You don't have to do this, girl, he said, his words full of desperation. We can go back. We'll leave, and you'll never hear from us again. Ifeoma shook her head, her expression unyielding. You are already too far gone. The forest has heard, and now it is time to pay. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the trees around them seemed to move closer, their branches twisting like fingers, trapping them in place. The men struggled, but they could not break free. The spirits were closing in on them. With a sharp snap, a branch shot from the trees, wrapping around the first man's wrist and pulling him to the ground. He screamed, but no one heard him but the trees. The second man tried to run, but the earth itself seemed to grab hold of his legs, pulling him to the ground, his body pinned. The third man, the one with the scar across his cheek, tried to fight, his panic growing. No, please, he screamed. We'll leave. We'll never come back. But it was too late. The spirits had already claimed them. The trees, the earth, and the river had risen up, and they would not stop until justice had been done. The air was still, except for the crackling of branches and the men's muffled cries. The wind began to stir again, a gentle breeze flowing through the trees, as Ifeoma watched them struggle, her eyes unwavering. The spirits had spoken, and the forest had done its part. She turned away from them, her mission complete. As she walked back into the depths of the forest, the woman who had guided her earlier appeared once more, her presence comforting. Justice has been served, the woman said softly. You are free, Ifeoma. The land remembers. Ifeoma nodded, feeling the weight of the night's events settle in her chest. She was not the same girl who had entered the forest hours ago. She was stronger, wiser, and bound to the earth in a way she had never imagined. Her journey had only just begun. But she was no longer lost. The forest was with her, and it always would be. The land had spoken, and Ifeoma would carry its voice forever. Ifeoma walked through the dense forest, her footsteps now echoing with an unusual calmness, like the rhythm of nature itself. The weight of the spirit's judgment on the men who had wronged her still lingered in the air, but it wasn't the burden of grief or fear that had once weighed her down. Now it was the steady pulse of the forest that filled her, and with each step she took, it was as though the earth itself was guiding her. The path ahead seemed clearer now, the trees standing taller, their branches no longer threatening but welcoming. It was as though the forest was acknowledging her transformation. The whispers of the spirits, soft and constant, now surrounded her like a shield. She could feel their presence, could feel the hum of their energy woven into every leaf and every breeze. She was no longer the girl who had wandered these woods out of innocence and trust. She was now the protector, the one who had called upon the spirits of the land, and they had answered her. The forest had become her home, her sanctuary, and as she walked deeper into it, Ifeoma could feel herself becoming one with the land. The air was thick with the scent of earth and growing things, with the promise of new life and rebirth. It was the same air she had breathed as a child, but now it was different. Now it was the air of power, of strength, of vengeance. It was a strange feeling, one that didn't feel quite like herself, but also one she had grown into. She had spent so many years feeling powerless, as though she were at the mercy of forces she couldn't control. But now, she was a force unto herself. She had learned to draw upon the strength of the earth and the wisdom of the spirits. She was not simply surviving anymore. She was thriving. The clearing she had entered was bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, the silver light reflecting off the surfaces of the river that wound lazily through the forest. The sounds of the night surrounded her, the rustle of leaves in the trees, the occasional snap of a twig as an unseen creature moved through the underbrush. But for all its wildness, the forest now felt peaceful, no longer a place of danger, but one of solace and strength. Ifeoma stopped by the river's edge, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soft soil, as she looked out over the water. The reflection of the moon shimmered on the surface, its pale light broken only by the occasional ripple from a passing fish or the movement of a small breeze. Her heart ached slightly, but not from sorrow. It was the ache of change, of a realization that the girl she had once been could never exist again. She was no longer the innocent, trusting child who had ventured into the forest with nothing but hope. She had become something else entirely. She had become a daughter of the land. The woman who had guided her through the forest earlier appeared once more, standing at the water's edge with the grace of someone who had walked these paths for eternity. Her long gray hair flowed around her like the very mist that hung in the air, and her eyes held the timeless wisdom of the earth. "You are ready now," the woman said, her voice as gentle as the wind. "The spirits have claimed you, and you have claimed them. The forest is no longer a place of fear for you. It is your place now, just as the land is your birthright." Ifeoma turned to face her, a slight smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I understand now," she said, her voice steady. "I am part of this land. The spirits will guide me." The woman nodded. "The forest will always remember what has been done to you, and now it will protect you. But the journey ahead is not an easy one, child. The balance of the land must be kept, and there will always be forces that seek to disrupt it." Ifeoma looked out across the river, her thoughts swirling like the current. She knew that what had happened to her could never be undone. The pain of that night, the suffering, the betrayal, would remain a part of her. But in the same breath, she knew she had something far more powerful now: purpose. She had the strength of the spirits, the will of the land, and the wisdom of the forest at her side. She was no longer just a victim. She was a force of nature. And she would protect this land, just as the spirits had protected her. "What must I do?" she asked, her eyes meeting the woman's gaze, filled with newfound resolve. "You must go to the village," the woman said. "There are others who need your strength, who need your protection. The men who sought to destroy you are not the only ones who prey upon the innocent. The land is always in need of guardians. Guardians who can see beyond the surface of things, who can feel the pulse of the earth beneath the feet of those who tread upon it." Ifeoma's heart swelled with a strange kind of energy, the energy that had been awakened in her by the spirits. She was ready. She had spent so long hiding, so long afraid, but no more. The village that had once felt like home now seemed far removed from the girl she had been. It was a place of memories, a place where the past had trapped her in sorrow. But now it was a place that needed healing, and Ifeoma would bring it. She would be the one to carry the forest's wisdom and strength into the world. "I will go," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I will return to the village. The land has spoken, and I will make sure the spirit's will is done." The woman smiled, her eyes softening with approval. "Go with the spirit's blessing, child. The forest will be with you always, guiding your steps. And remember, when you face the darkness, it is the light of the forest that will guide you back." Ifeoma took a deep breath and turned toward the path that led out of the clearing, back into the heart of the forest. As she walked, she could feel the pulse of the earth beneath her, her footsteps in rhythm with the land. It was as if the forest was whispering to her, urging her forward, urging her to fulfill the role she had been chosen for. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she was no longer afraid. She knew her purpose, and she knew she had the strength to face whatever came. As she reached the edge of the forest, the moonlight falling in soft beams through the trees, she paused for a moment, taking in the world around her. The village, once distant and full of pain, now seemed like a place where she could make a difference. She would carry the spirit's wisdom into the hearts of those who had forgotten the land's power. She would help the villagers understand that they were not alone, that the forest, the earth, and the spirits would always be with them. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, her resolve unshakable. She had been lost in the darkness, but now she had become the light. And with the light of the forest in her heart, she would find her way. As Ifeoma entered the village, the once familiar faces of the villagers greeted her with curiosity, uncertainty, and fear. They had heard whispers of the girl who had disappeared into the forest, and now, here she was, standing before them. Her eyes held something different, something they hadn't seen before. Calm strength. A connection to something far greater than themselves. They watched her as she passed by, sensing that she had changed, but not fully understanding what had happened to her. She could feel their fear, their skepticism, and their curiosity, but she didn't need their approval. The forest had given her its blessing, and that was enough. The woman who had once been part of this village, who had loved and trusted, now stood in the shadows, an enigma, a reminder of what could be if the land was cared for, and a warning of what could happen if it was not. Ifeoma made her way to the center of the village, where the elders had gathered. They watched her closely as she approached, their faces marked by years of wisdom and experience, but also by the weight of the struggles they had faced. "I have returned," Ifeoma said, her voice steady, carrying the weight of the forest's power. "The forest is with me, and I have come to remind you that the earth has a voice, and it will be heard." The elders exchanged glances, and a hush fell over the village. Ifeoma's journey had only just begun, but as she stood before them, she knew that this was where she was meant to be. She would guide them, just as the forest had guided her, and together they would heal the land and the people. As the seasons changed, so did Amanda. With each passing day, the weight of her past actions seemed to lighten. She had worked tirelessly to rebuild her relationships with the villagers of Umuomaku, and although the process of healing was slow, Amanda could finally see the fruits of her labor. The villagers no longer looked at her with disdain, and instead, they had started to appreciate her quiet humility. It wasn't always easy. Some still eyed her with suspicion, reluctant to let go of the memories of who she had been. Yet, others had embraced her, offering forgiveness and understanding in ways Amanda never expected. One particularly hot afternoon, as Amanda carried water from the well, she came across a group of young girls sitting under the shade of a large tree. They were chatting and giggling, their faces full of innocence, but there was something in their eyes that Amanda couldn't ignore. They were looking at her with curiosity, perhaps even awe. Amanda, who had once been the subject of such adoration, now saw these young girls in a new light. They were not looking at her as a symbol of beauty or power, but as a woman who had walked through the fire and come out the other side. It was a different kind of admiration, one born of respect rather than fleeting desire. "Good afternoon, Amanda," one of the girls called out cheerfully. "You've been working so hard lately. We all see it, you know." Amanda smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. She had spent so much of her life chasing approval, seeking attention, but now she found satisfaction in these quiet moments of connection. "Thank you," Amanda replied softly, her voice full of gratitude. "Hard work is important, but kindness is more so. I'm just glad to help where I can." The girls exchanged glances, their faces lighting up with understanding. "You've been teaching us a lot, Amanda," another girl said, her voice full of sincerity. "About being strong and humble. We didn't know you could change so much." Amanda took a moment to process their words. The compliment was unexpected, and yet, in a strange way, it felt like the highest form of praise she had ever received. The village had been full of criticism and judgment for so long, but now, these young girls were seeing her not as the woman who had once been full of pride, but as someone who had learned from her mistakes. "Thank you for saying that," Amanda responded, her heart swelling with emotion. "I hope that all of you can learn from my mistakes, and never let pride get in the way of kindness." As the girls giggled and ran off to play, Amanda stood there for a moment, reflecting on the beauty of the moment. She no longer sought adoration from the men or attention from the village leaders. She had come to understand that true admiration came not from beauty or wealth, but from the way one lived their life, how they treated others, how they carried themselves in the face of hardship. For the first time, Amanda truly felt at peace. That evening, as the sun began to set over the hills of Umuomaku, Amanda sat by the river, her legs dangling over the edge. The sound of the water flowing gently over the rocks filled her ears, and she closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over her. It was hard to believe how much had changed since that fateful day when she had first come to the river, seeking the goddess's favor. She had been desperate then, blinded by her own vanity, thinking that beauty and attention would fill the emptiness she felt inside. But now the emptiness had been filled, not by the admiration of others, but by the deep love and respect she had cultivated for herself. She had learned that true beauty came not from the reflection in the mirror, but from the kindness in one's heart, the willingness to admit fault, and the courage to change. Amanda had come a long way since those days of seeking power, but there were still moments when doubt crept in, reminding her of the woman she had once been. She had worked hard to rebuild the trust she had lost, but the journey of self-acceptance was ongoing. There were still times when she looked into the mirror and wondered if she was truly worthy of forgiveness. That night, as she sat by the river, the soft glow of the moon reflecting on the water, Amanda realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't just about others forgiving her. It was about her forgiving herself. She had spent so much of her life feeling unworthy, thinking that she could never make up for the mistakes she had made. But now, sitting in the stillness of the night, she understood that self-forgiveness was the final step in her journey. The next morning, Amanda woke up early, as she often did now. The air was crisp, and the sun had yet to rise, casting a soft golden light over the village. She made her way to the square, where the village's elders were gathering for their morning meeting. Over time, Amanda had become a trusted member of their council, though her position was not one of power or influence. She had earned her place through years of hard work and unwavering commitment to the community. When she arrived, the elders were already seated in a circle, their faces full of wisdom and experience. The village leader, a tall man with graying hair, nodded in her direction as she approached. "Amanda," he said, his voice steady and warm. "We've been waiting for you. We have an important matter to discuss today." Amanda took a seat beside him, looking around at the faces of the other elders. Over the years, she had come to respect them deeply. They were the pillars of the village, the ones who kept the traditions alive and guided the community through difficult times. They had been instrumental in her own healing, offering advice, support, and patience as she worked to earn back their trust. "What's the matter?" Amanda asked, her voice soft but curious. The elder leader looked at her intently. "We've been discussing the future of the village, Amanda. There's been talk of expanding, of inviting people from neighboring villages to settle here. We think it's time for Umuamaku to grow, but we want to ensure we're ready for such a change." "We will begin tomorrow," Ifeoma said, her voice steady and filled with conviction. "We will gather the elders, the healers, and the hunters. We will offer our apologies to the forest, to the river, to the earth. We will ask for forgiveness, and we will promise to honor the land from now on. We will restore the balance that has been lost." The villagers nodded in agreement, their expressions more serious now. They could no longer ignore the signs, the warnings from the earth. It was time to act. It was time to restore what had been broken. As the meeting broke up, Ifeoma stood alone for a moment, watching the villagers disperse to their homes. The night had fallen, and the stars twinkled brightly overhead. She felt a sense of peace wash over her, a quiet knowing that the spirits were with her, guiding her every step. She had come back to the village not just as a daughter of the earth, but as its protector. She had been chosen by the land, and she would do everything in her power to restore what had been lost. The men who had wronged her would face their judgment in time, but for now, her focus was on healing, on restoring the balance between the village and the earth. The forest had already begun to change. The trees whispered, the wind shifted, and the ground beneath her feet seemed to hum with life once more. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Ifeoma, for the village, and for the land. And together they would walk forward, side by side, restoring harmony to a world that had long been out of balance. The journey had only just begun, but the spirits had already spoken, and the land would remember.